So, Path of Exile 2 is out in early access for Xbox Series X and S, PS5, and PC, and even with roughly 82% of its 25,000 user reviews being positive, fans have mixed opinions. Some are blasting through the campaign, annihilating everything in their path. Others are struggling, getting trapped by monsters in a corner, as often as it's happened to me, and dying. Impressions on loot are pretty much divided, with some getting a steady amount of exalts and rare gear throughout the campaign, while others are less favored. There's a lot to get through, and while I had fun with the game, there are things to keep in mind for those on the fence. Let's go over 15 of them here. This is not Path of Exile 1. It's obvious, but it bears repeating. Path of Exile 2 isn't the same game as Path of Exile 1. Yeah, it shares many systems like the giant passive tree, skills and support gems, etc. But the movement, the combat, enemy and boss design, and so on are completely different. You need to take advantage of new mechanics to survive, besides simply dodge rolling out of the way, and rely on more than just a skill or two to do some damage. Side quests. For years, players perfected an optimized playthrough of the first game's campaign, including which side quests were mandatory. Yeah, throw all of that out the window with Path of Exile 2 and make sure you complete every side quest available. Not only will you fight monsters for additional EXP, but you'll also earn skill gems, passive skill points, gold, and even some gear. Zone bosses. While exploring different regions, you may find bosses in the world that aren't part of a main or side quest. Some can just be outright brutal, Blackjaw, not even once, but the rewards are usually worth it, including permanent buffs to resistance, life, mana, and much more. You can even rematch them to get additional gold. Loot is a completely different story. Skills. While Path of Exile fans will notice familiar skills, there are differences in how you earn and equip them. An Uncut Gem provided a choice of one of 4 skills in the beginning, but as your level increases, more become available, though you also have to meet the stat requirements to unlock and use them. Each skill starts with 2 sockets. You'll need Jeweler's Orbs to add more sockets. It also seems that high-level skill gems with more sockets can drop, so don't sell them immediately because you already have a level 14 or 15 skill. Also, unlike Path of Exile 1, you have to find higher-level gems to upgrade a skill. Using it and earning XP from kills sadly won't level them. Support gems. Support gems have different levels, though they're not nearly as high as skill gems. They provide differing effects, like cutting through a set amount of enemy resistance, more projectiles at the cost of damage, etc. While the game will recommend certain support skills, it's best to click on the arrow below to see all of the available options and find the one best suited for your playstyle. Resistances. Resistances are important in Path of Exile 2, especially since you won't get access to much in the starting passive tree nodes. Find more on gear and jewelry as you go along, since further story progress will apply negative modifiers to your current resistances, which only becomes more punishing in cruel difficulty. Even if a piece of gear fits your current stat requirements, try to craft or purchase something superior for higher resistance. It may not make the greatest difference in the endgame, but it's better than nothing. Dodging. There are many unanswered questions with the Path of Exile 2 currently, including, how exactly does the darn dodge roll work? When swarmed by monsters, you can't dodge through them, and it doesn't have invincibility frames. The start of a dodge roll will avoid many strikes and projectile attacks, but not slam attacks and area of effect spells. For the latter, it's best to move around normally, and then dodge when you're confident of landing outside, or away from the attack. Melee builds. Though every class can attempt melee in some fashion, most players will opt for only 2. The Warrior has received some criticism for its janky skills and the default attack dealing the most damage. However, the Invoker has been crushing content with skills like Glacial Cascade, Tempest Flurry, Tempest Bell to the extent that many feel like it's bugged, and Charge Staff. And since you're relying on elemental damage, you'll avail of benefits like freezing and shocking enemies. Ranged builds. Having played a Sorceress and transitioned to a Stormweaver during my time with the game, casting Frostwall to build Freeze and activate Cast on Freeze to bring down a comet on enemies works wonders. However, Deadeye Rangers are seeing much more success, especially with Lightning Arrow or Gas Arrow plus Flame Wall to ignite it, though it may get nerfed soon. Heck, some builds that use the Mercenary's grenades are opting for Deadeye for its extra projectiles and damage reduction with Wind Ward. Ascendancies. Ascendancies are your subclasses in Path of Exile 2, offering additional buffs and passes aside from the default tree. Unlocking them can be a headache though. You must complete the trial of the Sekhmet to unlock your Ascendancy, and choose carefully because there's currently no way to change it. After that, it's the Trial of Chaos, which requires completing 4 rounds of Ultimatum to gain more Ascendancy points. Both activities are challenging, so it's recommended to play them when you're over-leveled and have good gear. Completing both activities on higher difficulties is required for the remaining Ascendancy points, though they're clearly overtuned. Look for the Jinn coins that have 3 trials and the inscribed ultimatums with 7 trials. Tackle Ultimatum and wait for the Trial of the Sekhmet to receive much-needed balance changes. Crafting. Gone is the crafting bench and spending currency to add specific resistances, life, or allowing your gear to have 3 crafted modifiers. Instead, you must spend currency like regal orbs, exalts, etc. to add modifiers. There are several ways to go about this, like finding a magic item with a desired stat, adding a random modifier with an orb of augmentation, upgrading it to a rare with a regal orb, and adding more modifiers with exalts. Alternatively, if you find a good rare item with an undesired modifier, use a Chaos Orb to replace it with a new one, or an Orb of Amulet to remove it, though both are random, so take your chances. Keep checking vendors for any new items and try to save those exalts for the items that you know are going to be with you for longer periods. Reforging Bench. Once you obtain the hammer for the Forge Master in Act 3, you get the Reforging Bench, but it's not quite like the Recombinator from Sentinel League or the Settlers of Calgar bench. You must have 3 items of the same type and rarity, no corruption. They'll turn into a new item with an item level that's the lowest of the 3. More experimentation is required, but for now, it's best to avoid it unless you're chasing after specific types of loot and have a bunch of extras. Selling versus disenchanting. Whenever you're selling items, get them identified, usually from the hooded one, for mass IDs to sell for more gold. You can also disenchant, aka exchange them for shards of orbs. It's hard to say when you should do more selling versus disenchanting. If you're in the endgame and your build is figured out, sell loot for gold. Alternatively, you might want to save any good gear or weapons for other classes if you ever want to make alternate characters. Endgame. Despite the systemic issues some have with Path of Exile 2, most seem to enjoy the campaign. The endgame with the Atlas of Worlds is a different story. Much of this is due to the quality of loot drops, but there are other issues. For instance, be careful when tackling nodes with Delirium, Breach, etc. Depending on your build, using lower tier waystones with less punishing modifiers may be ideal. If you die on a map, the node is still available and you can attempt it again with a different waystone, but the endgame mechanics will be gone. This is a challenging game. You may have heard some people complaining about the difficulty and others telling them to just get good. And while there is a method to successfully conquer all of the challenges that Path of Exile 2 has in store, let's make one thing clear. This is a hard game. Even if you're not getting dogpiled by enemies with no way to roll out, it's rares or bosses stomping you into the ground without mercy, it may not suit everyone, especially with how difficult it is to come across resistance passives early on in the passive tree. Add more support gem slots to skills and whatever is the deal with the Trial of the Sekhmet and Ultimatum, and that's perfectly fine. It wouldn't be surprising if GGG heavily retuned the difficulty in the coming weeks, so waiting to see how early access pans out, especially since the full game will be free, isn't a bad idea. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.